Hello everybody, my name's Don Brown and today I'm going to give you a little bit of a trailer of the British Museum virtual tour that we're putting together for you. Show you one or two of the highlights of the place and tell you a little bit more about the history of the museum itself. So just bear with me a second as I bring all of that up. Here we go. This is the front of the British Museum, and the tour that we're going to do is the treasures of the British Museum. It'll be in two parts, otherwise it'll be a very, very long talk. The first part will be about the ancient world, and I'll tell you in a second the bits and pieces that we'll be looking at within the museum. But first of all, let's have a courtesy of Apple Maps, a just quick overview of the museum. This is a flyby. You can see the museum there, the green dome of the old reading room, surrounded by the new glass roof, which we'll see in a second. The museum's been here since 1753. It is one of the great museums of the world. The history of humankind back 2 million years, right up until the present. A huge amount of artifacts from all sorts of civilizations, from prehistory right back to early hominids. It's a fantastic place to visit. Gets about 6 million visitors a year, free to enter. Started in 1753, the basis of it was the collection of a doctor called Sir Hans Sloane. You might have heard of Sloane Square or Sloane Street in Chelsea. And when he died, he left his collection to the nation, and that formed the basis of it. Originally in a place called Montague House, most of what you see here was built in the early 1800s and is a fantastic spot for us to visit. So just tell you what we're going to be looking at later on. So the full tour, when we see it, we'll look at the Rosetta Stone, and I'll tell you a little bit about that on this trailer that we're doing. We'll then go to ancient Egypt, have a look at Ramesses II, Ramesses the Great as he was known, some ancient Egyptian mummies. The British Museum has got over 300 of those. We'll then go forward a few millennia to ancient Assyria. There are some wonderful friezes of the royal lion hunt in particular that I'll look at for you. We'll explore what are known as the Parthenon Marbles, used to be called the Elgin Marbles, now the Parthenon Marbles. Then a little bit of ancient Rome. Excuse me, the head of Augustus Caesar, the first definitive emperor of Rome after the Republic, and then a bit about Roman silverware. So that'll be part one of the guide. In this little trailer, we'll just look at the Rosetta Stone, but first I want to show you the this space here. It's a great court. This is where one goes into, and it's a new, or relatively new, opened in the year 2000. It was a Millennium project that connects the museum together. Let me just click on this so we can see it. There we go. This is it on Google Maps. You can see this wonderful ceiling with these over 3,000 bits of triangular glass there, designed by Foster and Partners. This is the great court itself. They took a space that was open to the elements and made it into its new public space right in the middle of the museum. The big circular structure that you can see in front of you, that is the old British Library reading room. The British Library moved out of here in 1997. The reading room is occasionally used for exhibition spaces, but that is the famous round reading room where Charles Dickens worked, where Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital, walking there from his house in Soho every day for best part of 20 years. Usually very, very crowded, as we'll see in the next slide when we go on to talk about the Rosetta Stone. And as mentioned before, British Museum gets about 6 million visitors a year. Some days it feels like 5.9 million of those are all looking at this stone, this slightly over 1 meter tall bit of a granite-like rock, weighs about 3/4 of a ton, pretty unprepossessing. Let's have a look at it in a bit more detail. Yet it's broken at the top even. It should have had a curved top. It's what's called a stele. But this rather sort of plain, unprepossessing bit of granite helped unlock so many of the secrets of ancient Egypt that had been lost for nearly 2,000 years. It's called the Rosetta Stone because Rosetta is the place where it was found. Just here, in modern days it's called Rashid, but the French who invaded Egypt as part of the Napoleonic Wars in 1799 called it Rosetta. They took various archaeologists and antiquarians with them because they knew there would be treasures to be found. And one of them discovered the stone on the left as part of a building. It had been taken down and was just being part of the wall. They recognized the importance of it almost straight away and was brought back and looked after. It ended up in the British Museum because in 1801, there was the Battle of the Nile. The British beat the French, and part of the surrender terms of that were all the treasures that the French had acquired were given to the British. So the Rosetta Stone, was presented to the British Museum by King George III in 1802, and that is actually inscribed on the side of it. It's important because up until this point, we hadn't been able to decipher the hieroglyphs, the ancient script that the Egyptians had used. It had been a dead language for the best part of 2,000 years. The stone itself dates from 196 BC, the reign of a pharaoh called Ptolemy V. And the reason why it's so important is that it has got 3 scripts on it. You may just see them here, but let me zoom in a little bit more on them. At the top are the hieroglyphs. This is a language, or rather a script, that no one had been able to read for nearly 2,000 years. By the time when this stone was made in 196 BC, it was already a script that was going out of use, used mainly by the priestly class rather than the others. The everyday people would use this script, which is called Demotic. And at the bottom, you have ancient Greek. Now, the reason it's Greek is that Ptolemy V was a descendant of one of the Alexander the Great's generals. Alexander the Great had conquered Egypt, put his general Ptolemy on the throne. We're cascading down the generations, and Ptolemy V is ruling Egypt at this point. So the court, the king, the emperor, the pharaoh, they're using and speaking Greek. The people are using Demotic, and the priests are writing in hieroglyphs. We could read ancient Greek. We couldn't read Demotic, we couldn't read the hieroglyphs, but we could read the ancient Greek. And one of the things that leapt out when the archaeologists looked at it was towards the end of the script, and it's a fairly boring text. It's to do with the rights of the priests, the rights of the pharaohs. It's a public notice that was put up outside a temple. Towards the end of the piece, it says, I've caused this to be written in the language of the gods, the language of the books, and the language of the people. So the 3 different scripts. So they knew what was written in the ancient Greek was also there in the Demotic and the hieroglyphs. So you think, simple, easy enough to translate. We can read the Greek. We've got the other scripts. Let's work our way back. A little bit more difficult than that. Some people thought that the hieroglyphs might be a phonetic language, so spelt it out, k-a-t. say as we have. Some thought it was a pictorial language, so that each image represents a word or a concept, a bit like Chinese or Japanese. Scholars across Europe try to decode it. There was an Englishman called Thomas Young who got reasonably close. He was working his way towards it, but didn't quite manage to do the full translation. He blamed it on having a very bad copy of the hieroglyphs and of the Greek, but he was going in the wrong direction. The person who finally managed to crack it was a French scholar, a young French scholar. He was only 32. The gentleman on the left is Jean-Francois Champollion. And after spending a few years himself going off in the wrong direction of trying to translate it, in 1832, so I think 30 years after it had been given to the British Museum, he finally was able to translate it. So you can see in this famous letter he wrote, the Greek letters down the side, the Demotic script here, and how that works with the hieroglyphs. From this, he was able to publish a complete grammar, essentially a translation dictionary. And this allowed him and us to read those secrets of the ancient Egyptians. That's the Rosetta Stone. Later on, we'll be looking at some of the other ancient treasures out there. If you'd like to find out more, go to this link here, cut.ly/UK Tours Online, and sign up for our newsletter, and we'll pop you the details along when these talks are scheduled. Thanks for your attention. Hope to see you soon.